talked about this? Okay. Again, Socrates to Plato, Plato to Aristotle, Aristotle to Alexander the Great, all the way to his empire. And again, I wish you could kind of really get a sense of how big this empire is. I mean, the United States fits inside of it. And this is at a time when they were traveling all on foot and horseback. So to be able to conquer all of that was significant. Oh, by the way, also you'll notice that on the videos sometimes when I'm talking here, when I edit them afterwards, I'll put the information in there. So for example, was it this class? One of my classes, somebody asked me when he won his first battle, Alexander. Or maybe it was 4th grade. I think it was 4th grade actually. I was telling him that he conquered this whole empire by the time he was 30. And someone asked me when he started. So in the video, I'll mention, like, he won this battle of Gratium at 23 years old. So sometimes I'll put little stuff in there as well as I'm going through it. We talked about this, School of Athens, Diogenes. So you can see kind of who was important to the Renaissance figures as well. They took these people seriously for a good reason. We talked about Socrates' the Socratic method, which is the method of asking questions. And I hope that you're cognizant of the quote from last time, from Shane Xiao, and today from G.K. Chesterton. And you're going to notice that these things always seem to point towards whatever it is that we're studying at the time. Both of these quotes are going to point towards Socrates and what he's trying to get across to us. Athenian philosopher, Socratic method. And it's important that he fought in the Peloponnesian War. And I've got this little fact right here. He was a friend of Alcibiades. And Alcibiades, is a point, he fought for the Athenians, and then he defected to the Spartans in the middle of the war. And the Peloponnesian War was between the Athenians and the Spartans. That was this ongoing conflict you can see for going on 26 years, 25 years. And he fought for the Athenians, betrayed Athens to go fight for Sparta. And then while he was fighting for Sparta, he pissed off the Spartans and they kicked him out. So then he went and fought for the Persians, who were also involved. And then afterwards, he ended up going back and fighting for Athens at the very end. So Alcibiades is not a loyal guy. And that becomes important. He's a historical figure, but he becomes very important in Socrates' life, which we're going to see. And also very important here, Socrates believed that Athens was defeated in the Peloponnesian War because they had a degenerate culture. So when Socrates would go around and question people in Athens, it wasn't him just trying to get to some level of truth. We had this idea of Socrates as wearing a toga, and he was a man of peace, and he was just trying to seek truth. He wasn't. He wasn't. He was an arrogant guy. He was doing it specifically because he was arrogant. He thought he was smarter than everybody else, and he let you know it too. He didn't just, he was not a humble guy at all. And it's hard to read anything that he said, his dialogues, and get from that he was somehow humble. He was not. He would go around Athens and explain to the Athenians that they lost this war against the Spartans because they were a degenerate culture. He was, after the Peloponnesian War, there was a group called the 70 Tyrants. The 70 Tyrants, which is important. I write down 70 Tyrants. And it was a group of people that Sparta sent to rule over the Athenians. Socrates tutored them. He helped them and said, oh, yeah, I'll teach you about Athens. And he taught them about Athenian philosophy and about their culture and everything like that, because he believed that Sparta was a superior culture. That would be like if the United States and Canada went to war, and Canada defeated the United States, and then sent people in to rule over us, and then I was like, oh yeah, I'll help you guys do it. And then I spent all my time walking around San Diego telling you all, you know why you guys lost to Canada? Because you suck. That's why. You can imagine now Socrates is not a popular figure. When they say, oh, they hated him because he spoke truth. Yes, but it was more than that. It was that plus something else. So he was unemployed. So he was 70 years old and unemployed. And he was married to a woman named Xanthe. She was 40 years younger than him. But I mention her whenever I talk about Socrates because she has a reputation in history and in literature for just being an absolute horrible, nagging bitch of a wife. There's a story about how she gets angry with him because so she goes and she gets a chamber pot, chamber pot? That's where you poop and pee in, and she dumps it over his head. Yeah, so she has this reputation of just being a nagger, a shrew, this horrible wife. And she really was. She really was. For example, one of the things that she expected of Socrates was that she wanted him to get a job. Can you imagine that? She also wanted him to help raise their children together. Can you believe that? What a horrible wife she was. I mention her because she's gotten a really bad rap. She's gotten this reputation for being a terrible wife. She was absolutely a wonderful wife to him. And she's the reason that he was able to live as long as he did. Again, she was 40 years younger than him, which, by the way, tells us something about Socrates. When we say that, oh, he was unemployed, he was illiterate, he was like a low-class person, he wasn't. Because she was the daughter of a senator. She was very well connected and very wealthy. She would not have been married to Socrates unless he was a somebody in that society. So she was far younger than him, but because of her political connections, Socrates lived longer than he would have otherwise. Because it was, we should kill Socrates. So we can't kill him, he's married to Xanthippe. Okay, so they put up with him a long time. So she has a terrible reputation, and it's entirely unfair. Again, she's remembered for being a terrible wife because she wanted him to help raise the children and be a father. And get a job, and to be at home, not hanging out with the boys. So all because of that, she's been called these terrible things. So I always bring her up because, again, she has a reputation that she doesn't deserve. I just alluded to this idea that Socrates never wrote down his own philosophy. So that's caused people to speculate and say, oh, he must have been illiterate. No, actually he was not illiterate. He was very educated, very smart guy. Almost certainly knew how to read and write. But he believed that philosophy should be lived, not written down. Meaning that if you wanted to know what he thought about something, you could just look at his life and say, oh, okay, Socrates believes X, Y, and Z. You can tell that based off of his life. It's true about all of us, by the way. All of us, I know what you believe by looking at how you behave. Not by looking at what you write down. Not by looking at what you say. Not even by looking at your reputation, but by looking at what you do. So he believed that if a philosopher should live their philosophy, and if it was a good philosophy, that people would then imitate your life, and then that would be like you wrote it down. And so you'd have generations of people. So in other words, Socrates would live his life, and then Plato would learn from that, and Plato would live his life imitating Socrates. And then Aristotle, who's a student of Plato's, would live his life to imitate Plato, and you could tell the strength of a philosophy off of that. That's why he never wrote things down. He was called an ascetic, or actually, I usually call him a cynic, probably. He didn't write anything down. So everything that we have about Socrates was written down either by Plato, which is most of what we have from him, or his other student, Xenophon. And Xenophon wrote down a few dialogues. I think it's 5. So lesser known Xenophon. Aristotle also mentions Socrates, so we know a little bit about Socrates from Aristotle, although Aristotle never met him. And the dramatist Aristophanes. Aristophanes wrote a play called Clouds, in which he made fun of Socrates. So he's a very well-known playwright at the time. So that tells us again that Socrates isn't just some dude. Somebody actually, a well-known playwright actually takes time to write a play that makes fun of him. That would be like if Quentin Tarantino makes a movie to make fun of you. He wouldn't just do that if you were nobody. You'd have to be somebody. So that again tells us that Socrates was somebody. And he's an idealist. And this goes back to the theories of knowledge. He believed that true knowledge is gained not through the 5 senses, but by the mind. And we're going to see that he means something very specific by that. So therefore what that means, that we're going to see, is that he believes that as a human being, you already know everything. We're going to see. So therefore a teacher's job is to help you remember what you already know. And then hopefully that makes sense now when they say that the Socratic method of teaching is to ask questions. He believed, and by the way, when he says that you already know everything, he really means that. You know everything. You know physics, and like true physics, too. You know mathematics. You know the surface temperature of the planets in the Andromeda galaxy. You know everything. You've experienced it before. You just have to be reminded. And I'll explain very clearly what that means. And then Plato. Oh, by the way, so after this. So Plato he's a student of Socrates. And then, by the way, that's something that you should just know kind of culturally, because you'll encounter that kind of stuff in life. He established one of the first schools in the Western world, which was the Academy. And he wrote 35 dialogues. So from this, what I want you guys to get is that he was a student of Socrates. He established the Academy. That's important. That's all you really need to get from this slide, those first two things there. First two things there. So he wrote 35 Socratic dialogues. So most of what we know about Socrates' philosophy comes from Plato. What that therefore means is that we don't really know where Plato ends, or I'm sorry, where Socrates ends and where Plato begins. In other words, what Plato was writing down, it very well could just be his own philosophy. We don't know. We don't know the differences. Because Plato writes only in this dialogue form, where he uses Socrates as a character for delivering his philosophy. Very importantly, by the way, it said that he was a Pancratian Olympiad champion. Pancration is like MMA, but without the rules.
Damn,
yeah, Plato was a badass. Plato was a badass. That's why I love this idea when we think of like writers and philosophers as like they're supposed to be these little skinny nerdish types. Far from it, man. Far, far from it. When you look at like the old philosophers and even the old writers, this whole idea of like the little bookish guy with his big glasses and the nerdy guy, that's a really 20th century concept. That's not, when you look at the writers, you know, poets, novelists, for the most part, they went out and they lived life, and they did crazy stuff, and they came back and they wrote books about it. It's only very recently that this whole stereotype of the nerdy academic kind of takes over. I mean, you have to have, especially if you're an academic, you have to have courage to present ideas, and you have to have the strength to back them up. So it's said that he won the laurel, which would be like a gold medal, in Pancration twice. So he was a badass. But his real name, by the way, is not Plato. That's a little-known fact. His actual name is Aristocles. You don't even know that. That's one of those fun facts when someone, you just happen to know that his name was actually Aristocles, not Plato. Plato was a nickname. The word means broad, like wide. It could refer to his shoulders, because he was a wrestler. Maybe they just called him, like, you know, big shoulder guy. But it probably refers to the size of his forehead. Which is great, because the guy's one of the greatest known intellects to ever live, and he's just remembered as big-ass forehead guy. In his defense, big forehead was supposed to indicate that someone was particularly intelligent. That was like one of those signs of intelligence. So, you know, Grecians would, like, you know, shave their heads back a little further to make their foreheads look bigger. So some of us just have big foreheads by nature. So yeah, big ass forehead guy. Oh, what else? I explained to you that because Socrates never wrote anything down, most of what we have comes from Plato. So therefore, it's impossible to know where Plato begins and Socrates ends. So sometimes you'll hear me refer to them interchangeably. And, you know, Socrates, Plato, Plato, Socrates. Pretty much the same thing. Too bad I can't see. Oh, you see the picture in the background?
Yeah.
So these are the busts that they have of them. That's Socrates and then Plato. So these are the CGI things I thought were pretty cool. So that's what they probably look like. Now you can kind of see it in Plato where you go like, oh yeah, he looked like he may have been a wrestler or a fighter or something. And Socrates had this reputation of just being this dumpy little fat man. And you can see that in him too. But keep in mind, he also saved Alcibiades' life in the Peloponnesian War. So he was a soldier. He was a warrior. But in later life, he becomes that. Which is fine. Yeah, 1,000-yard stare, man. Questions? All right.